After praying to the Virgin Mary statue 100,000 times, my younger sister, Stephanie Harvey, and I have returned to the day we're meant to get reincarnated. In our previous lifetime, Stephanie chose to reincarnate into the womb belonging to Tiara Cromwell, the richest woman in town. As for me, I could only reincarnate into the womb of Lynette Ross, a mistress, seeing as there were too many souls queuing up for their turn. Once we were born, Stephanie was pampered and doted on by Tiara, whereas I kept getting degraded and insulted because I was the child of a mistress. You're just a lowly bitch with a mistress as your mother. You don't even have the right to lick my shoes for me. Unexpectedly, our shitty father worked with Lynette to take over Tiara's family business. Tiara went broke overnight and fell from grace. As for me, I transformed into a proper heiress. When Stephanie saw the photos of my grand coming-of-age party on my social media feed, she came knocking on my door and pleaded for my help. "Madison, we're half-sisters, aren't we? Please help me." I decided to give her some money, seeing as she was my sister. But Stephanie pushed me into the pool, resulting in my drowning. Now that we've both returned to the day we get reincarnated, Stephanie quickly reincarnates into Lynette's womb. I, on the other hand, choose Tiara as my mother. Later on, Stephanie sobs as she takes her own life repeatedly just so she can get another chance to start over again. "Dear sister, this time, it's my turn to be the Harvey family's heiress. You can go be the daughter of that idiot who can't even keep a man." My younger sister, Stephanie Harvey, sneered viciously as she rushed ahead and reincarnated into the belly of our scumbag father's mistress. Watching the determination on her face, I couldn't help but laugh. Without hesitating, I quickly chose to reincarnate into the womb of the richest woman in the country, Tiara Cromwell. The next second, I heard the mistress, Lynette Ross, snapping loudly at Tiara. "So what if you're Maxwell's wife, Tiara? Your marriage is just a business deal. The woman he really loves is me. You think you can steal him from me just because you're pregnant? He only cares about the baby in my belly." Lynette's arrogant, smug voice echoed in my ears. Even as an embryo, it made me shudder. I would never forget how she had used and tortured me throughout my childhood just to achieve her own goals. So when Stephanie insisted on reincarnating into Lynette's womb this time, I was thrilled. God knew how much I had envied her for having a rich mother who protected her from everything, spoiled her endlessly, and gave her abundant wealth the moment she was born. The worst hardship she had ever suffered in life was drinking an iced black coffee. And me? I was the product of an affair. That fact alone earned me countless cold stares. On top of that, I had a mother who was nothing more than a pretty but brainless mistress. In her world, our scumbag father, Maxwell Harvey, was everything. She would do anything to win his favor. It wasn't unusual for Lynette to give me cold showers in winter to deliberately trigger my allergies. The cruelest thing she ever did was go to hospitals and buy used clothing from seriously ill patients, then make me wear them. Because of that, I developed pneumonia when I was very young, and it left me with a lifelong illness. As I lay in my hospital bed, I had envied Stephanie countless times for having such a good mother, but Stephanie didn't see it that way. She always complained that Tiara was clueless and didn't know how to please Maxwell, causing his attention to shift toward me and Lynette. So when the Cromwell family's business empire collapsed, Stephanie was the first to kick Tiara while she was down. Taking advantage of Tiara's favoritism, Stephanie emptied her accounts and ran straight to Maxwell. But what kind of man was Maxwell? He had spent years lying low, waiting for the perfect moment to destroy the Cromwell family. How could he possibly care about Stephanie, who carried the blood of that family? Her own father despised her. Her own mother hated her. In the end, Stephanie dragged me down with her as we both died. Now that we'd been given a second chance at life, she had truly given me a huge surprise. A rich mother with unimaginable wealth and power, in comparison to a fragile mistress who could only cling to men whenever something went wrong. Even a fool would know which one to choose. I'd love to see if Stephanie could still laugh once Lynette tortured her body into ruin. Not long after Lynette left, rumors began spreading through the social circle. Both the wife and mistress were pregnant, and people were speculating that the mistress might soon replace the wife. Such blatant provocation could only have been pulled off by Lynette. But the rumors didn't affect Tiara at all. Her marriage to Maxwell had always been nothing more than a business arrangement. There had never been any real affection between them. I remembered it clearly. In my previous life, Stephanie had been extremely restless in Tiara's womb, forcing Tiara to hand over the company's authority to her subordinates. And that temporary loss of power during her pregnancy created a disaster for the company. Maxwell took advantage of the opportunity, placing his own people inside the firm. That was what ultimately led to Tiara going bankrupt. Compared to Stephanie, who had descended into the world like some demon child, I was practically an angel, ridiculously well-behaved. Whenever Tiara was working, I never stirred. Instead, I listened quietly. When she took supplements, I never got greedy, careful not to turn myself into some gluttonous baby. When she exercised, I obediently curled myself into a little ball. She never experienced any of the usual pregnancy symptoms. Even the doctors praised her, saying they had never seen such a well-behaved fetus. Perhaps Tiara sensed my care for her. Before I was even born, she had already begun paving the road for my future. 3 properties each in the city centers of Belrand, Solston, Granwich and Styria. 2 entire streets of storefronts in prime locations. Dividends from the shares of her companies were already arranged in my name, waiting to be transferred to me once I came of age. In this life, as long as I didn't try to start my own business, the annual dividends alone would keep me comfortable for several lifetimes. My situation couldn't have been more different from Stephanie's, who was already suffering in Lynette's womb. Lynette was terrified that pregnancy would make her gain weight and ruin her figure, causing her to lose Maxwell's affection. So she dieted constantly. Not only did she follow online influencers and take all kinds of nonsense pills to control her weight, but she also wrapped her belly tightly with binding bands every day to keep it from growing. On top of that, she woke up before dawn each morning to make Maxwell a lovingly prepared breakfast. She believed the way to a man's heart was through his stomach. Stephanie didn't have enough to eat. She didn't get enough sleep. Even her living space kept shrinking, making her feel suffocated. 9 months later, Tiara and Lynette went into labor at the same time. This time I was still the older sister, but it was my choice. I didn't want the mother who had given me such immense wealth to suffer. Sure enough, seeing how obedient I was, Tiara added another 20 pounds of gold to the already generous fortune she had prepared for me. Stephanie's situation was very different. As if determined to announce her presence to the entire world, she stubbornly stayed inside Lynette's womb for an extra day before finally coming out. Lynette had to switch from natural labor to a C-section. Learning that a useless, money-losing child had ruined the perfect body she'd worked so hard to maintain, Lynette was filled with nothing but resentment toward Stephanie. Still, because of the difficult birth, Maxwell paid Lynette a little extra attention. That was the only reason she didn't lash out at Stephanie right away. In my previous life, I had been born too quickly, before Maxwell even arrived. Lynette had nearly strangled me, saying that a useless child who couldn't help her keep a man didn't deserve to live. If a nurse hadn't discovered it in time, I would have suffocated and been left brain damaged. But this time everything was different. While Stephanie grew up as Lynette's prop, used to fake illnesses and win sympathy, I followed the path Tiara had laid out for me. I attended an international school, building relationships with the children of wealthy families and forming a network of connections. Meanwhile, Stephanie, in order to gain Maxwell's favor, clung to him every day, begging him to teach her basic maths after his return from his fancy overseas education. Under Tiara's guidance, I enjoyed the best educational resources, taught by the most elite teachers. When Stephanie showed up in front of me, flaunting the jewelry Maxwell had given her, I had already entered Tiara's company to gain experience during the months after finishing my SATs. Stephanie sneered at that. What's the point of doing all that? In the end, the entire Cromwell family empire will belong to my dad anyway. Careers are for men. The only thing women like us need to do is stay beautiful. When I heard that, I didn't bother responding. I simply continued focusing on my own work. But just before my 18th birthday, the Cromwell family still collapsed. When the Cromwell family crumbled overnight, all the people who used to flatter them immediately turned on them, kicking them when they were down. Each one was eager to tear a piece of flesh from the fallen beast that was the Cromwell family. Maxwell, who had been lying low for years, seized the opportunity and served up the divorce papers. Tiara had never loved him, but they had shared a bed for nearly 20 years. It was impossible for her to feel nothing. While I was busy comforting her, Lynette showed up at Maxwell's front door as soon as she heard that he had filed for divorce, along with Stephanie. This was the first time the two of us had faced each other properly since our rebirth. But she looked nothing like the proud, confident princess I remembered. Instead, her face now carried the marks of someone used to lowering her head and flattering others. With the divorce papers in hand, Lynette was full of confidence. While she ran her mouth at Tiara, Stephanie lifted her chin and spoke with disdain. Ever since I was little, the ones Dad loved most has always been Mom and me. That will never change. Madison Harvey, your good days are over. It's my turn to be the heiress of the Harvey family. Being forced by that bitch Tiara to study and learn all these years. Having no freedom and living like a puppet. It must have been miserable, huh? I looked at her like she was an idiot. What on earth made her think that I'd been miserable? Seriously, my life had been too comfortable. As long as there was something I wanted to do or learn, there was nothing I couldn't try. If I fell, someone was always there to catch me. I had endless chances to make mistakes. And the greatest advantage of having a rich mother was that I didn't have siblings to fight over the resources. Tiara had poured everything she had into me. At just 18 years old, she had already prepared enough capital for me to step into the business world. As for Maxwell's love, what use was that vague, unreliable affection when I already had money and power? Stephanie didn't even own a single piece of real estate. She had never even seen something like equity or stock options. What she didn't know was that Lynette had already conceived a baby boy through IVF. He was just waiting to be born so he could inherit everything from Maxwell, and he would leech off his sister. In my previous life, when Stephanie stormed into my 18th birthday party and dragged me to die with her, I should have thanked her. That party had never been a proper celebration. In reality, it was an auction to select a husband for me, one who would pay the highest price. Maxwell, thinking of profits, and Lynette, eager to secure her own position, picked men who all had hidden illnesses or serious problems. Only men like that would offer the kind of money they wanted. Besides, what made Stephanie think that someone who had already lived through this life once would simply sit back and watch the Cromwell family collapse? Yes, our family was facing a crisis. But I had never said the crisis couldn't be solved. It looked serious now, but it was simply part of the plan Tiara and I had set up to expose the useless parasites inside the company. Of course, Stephanie didn't need to know any of that. Right now she was arrogant and smug, and I was very curious to see whether she would regret choosing to be born to Lynette once everything came crashing down. Seeing that I didn't respond, Stephanie tossed me an invitation to her 18th birthday party. Even though we're sisters, our fates will be completely different from now on. This time, I'll generously allow you to witness my shining moment firsthand. Consider it the last bit of sisterly kindness between us. I lowered my gaze, hiding the smile tugging at my lips. Shining moment? More like her darkest one. Stephanie's 18th birthday party arrived as scheduled. Holding the invitation, I walked straight into the venue. For a moment, the guests looked surprised to see me, but the reaction quickly faded. People who had climbed this high in business were old foxes. Even if they secretly wanted to tear each other apart, they would still smile politely on the surface. Stephanie wore a delicate pink princess dress, looking like a doll. I glanced around and realized that every guest present had also attended my 18th birthday party in my previous life. Only this time, the star of the show had changed. Maxwell led Stephanie to the center of the stage and announced her identity to the guests. Standing there with a crown on her head, she shot me a provocative look. I raised my wine glass in response. She frowned slightly, as if unable to understand why I seemed so calm. I set the glass down and murmured into my earpiece, "Do it." The next second, a group of police officers stormed through the doors. "Maxwell Harvey and Stephanie Harvey, you're under arrest." The music in the ballroom didn't stop immediately. For a few surreal seconds, the string quartet continued to play a lively waltz, completely out of sync with the grim-faced, uniformed officers fanning out across the marble floors. Then someone bumped into a music stand. The cello let out a harsh screech. Silence crashed down over the room, heavy and suffocating. "What is the meaning of this?" Maxwell demanded, stepping in front of Stephanie. His voice boomed with the practiced authority of a CEO, but I could see the slight tremor in his jaw. "Do you know whose banquet you are interrupting? I am Maxwell Harvey. I demand to speak to your commanding officer." The lead detective, a tall woman with eyes as cold as flint, didn't even blink. She held up a warrant. "We know exactly who you are, Mr. Harvey. You are under arrest for massive corporate fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion, and industrial espionage. Stephanie Harvey, you are being charged as a co-conspirator and accessory to financial fraud." Stephanie's delicate pink princess dress suddenly looked absurd. The color drained from her face, leaving her chalky and hollow. "Fraud? Accessory? No, you're mistaken. I'm an 18-year-old girl. It's my birthday. Dad, tell them." She grabbed Maxwell's sleeve, but her father was too busy staring at the warrant. His eyes darted rapidly across the legal text, his face morphing from indignation to absolute terror. "This is impossible," Maxwell muttered, stepping back. He actually pulled his arm out of Stephanie's grasp, leaving her stumbling forward. The Cromwell accounts were scrubbed. The offshore transfers were encrypted. "Nothing is truly encrypted when the CEO of the company hands over the decryption keys to the authorities," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but in the dead silence of the ballroom, it carried like a gunshot. The sea of wealthy guests parted, eager to distance themselves from a sinking ship. I walked slowly down the center aisle, my heels clicking rhythmically against the floor. I held a flute of champagne in one hand, completely at ease. Maxwell's head snapped toward me. "You, Tiara's brat. What did you do?" "I didn't do anything, father." I smiled, though it didn't reach my eyes. "My mother did." "Did you really think Tiara Cromwell, a woman who built an empire from the ground up, would leave her company vulnerable just because she was pregnant? Did you actually believe her loyal subordinates would betray her for a few extra million from you?" Maxwell's breathing grew shallow. He looked like a fish hauled onto the deck of a boat. I took a sip of my champagne. "The subordinates you bribed were acting on our orders. The vulnerabilities you exploited were honeypots. Every single dollar you siphoned from the Cromwell accounts didn't go into your private offshore funds, Maxwell. It went into dummy accounts monitored by the Federal Financial Crimes Division. You faked the bankruptcy." Stephanie's voice was a shrill, trembling whisper. She stared at me, her eyes wide with a horrific realization. The collapsed stock, The divorce papers. You set us up. Correction. I said smoothly. We set him up. You dear sister, set yourself up. I didn't do anything. Stephanie shrieked, looking at the police. I don't know anything about business. I can barely do math. I just buy jewelry and dresses. That's exactly why you were so useful to him, I replied, pointing my glass at Maxwell. Right, Dad? You needed a clean proxy to hold the stolen assets. Someone too stupid to ask questions, but greedy enough to sign whatever documents you put in front of her. Stephanie slowly turned her head to look at the man she had spent 18 years flattering. The man she had chosen over a loving, wealthy mother. Maxwell didn't even look at her. He was sweating profusely, frantically calculating his odds. She signed the documents. Maxwell suddenly blurted out, pointing a shaking finger at Stephanie. I didn't forge her signature. She's a legal adult as of midnight yesterday. The offshore holding companies are in her name. She's the primary beneficiary. If there's fraud, she's the one responsible. A collective gasp echoed through the ballroom. Even the seasoned, cutthroat businessmen in the crowd looked disgusted. Throwing your own daughter to the wolves to save your own skin was a new low. Dad, Stephanie whispered, her voice cracking. What are you saying? Shut up, Stephanie. Maxwell hissed, his veneer of a loving father completely disintegrating. You useless leech. You've done nothing but drain my bank accounts for 18 years. You wanted to be the heiress? Well, take the responsibility. The police officer moved forward, producing a pair of handcuffs. The metallic click-clack was the most beautiful music I had heard all evening. Maxwell Harvey, Stephanie Harvey, you have the right to remain silent, the detective droned, spinning Stephanie around. No, Mom. Mom, help me. Stephanie screamed, thrashing wildly. The diamond tiara on her head slipped off, crashing onto the marble floor and shattering into pieces. Right on cue, Lynette pushed through the crowd. She was heavily pregnant, holding her swollen belly, her face a mask of panic. Maxwell, what is going on? My baby. Get away from me, you stupid bitch. Maxwell roared, struggling against the two officers holding his arms. This is your fault. You and that useless daughter of yours. If she hadn't been so greedy, if she hadn't demanded so much, I wouldn't have rushed the transfers. Lynette froze, her mouth opening and closing like a trapped fish. She looked at Maxwell, then at Stephanie, who was sobbing hysterically as the cold steel locked around her wrists. But the IVF baby, Lynette stammered, stepping back. You said when he was born, he would inherit everything. There is nothing left to inherit. Maxwell spat, his eyes bulging. I'm ruined. You're ruined. That parasite in your stomach is going to be born into the gutter. Lynette let out a piercing shriek. Whether it was from the psychological shock of her meal ticket evaporating, or a physical reaction, she suddenly doubled over, clutching her stomach. A dark stain began to spread across the skirt of her designer maternity gown. My stomach, it hurts, the baby. Lynette collapsed onto her knees, screaming in agony. Stephanie, dragged away by the police, looked back at her mother writhing on the floor, and her father spitting curses like a madman. Her gaze finally met mine. I stood above the chaos, pristine and untouched. I raised my champagne flute to her one last time. Happy birthday, sister. The fallout was spectacular. It dominated the headlines for weeks. Harvey patriarch indicted in century's largest corporate fraud. Heiress or accomplice. 18-year-old daughter faces 20 years in federal prison. Cromwell empire strikes back. The mastermind behind the sting. Tiara and I sat in her sunlit office at the top floor of the Cromwell building, sipping Earl Grey tea as we watched the news coverage on the massive wall monitor. You handled the press conference beautifully this morning, Madison, Tiara said, her eyes warm with genuine pride. The board is entirely behind you. They've agreed to appoint you as executive vice president. I had a good teacher. I smiled, setting my teacup down. Unlike Stephanie, who saw Tiara as a boring, clueless woman who couldn't keep a man, I saw her for what she truly was, a shark. A shark who loved her child, yes, but a predator nonetheless. Over the past 18 years, we had slowly but surely excised the rotting parts of the company, setting up dummy corporations for Maxwell to steal from. We had essentially handed him the rope he used to hang himself. Any news on Lynette? Tiara asked smoothly, casually stirring her tea. The stress triggered a massive hemorrhage, I replied. She lost the baby. The doctors had to perform an emergency hysterectomy to save her life. She's physically recovered, but the hospital kicked her out yesterday because Maxwell's accounts are frozen. She has no insurance and no money to pay the bills. Tiara let out a soft, elegant hum. A pity. She spent her whole life weaponizing her womb to trap men. Now she has nothing. It was poetic justice. In my past life, Lynette had weaponized her fertility against me, making me feel like garbage simply because my existence didn't benefit her financially. She had tortured me, ruined my health, and laughed about it. Now she was a middle-aged woman with no skills, no assets, no youth to sell, and no womb to bargain with. I had bought the Harvey family estate during the government liquidation auction for pennies on the dollar. My first act as the new owner was to have the police legally evict Lynette. I heard from my security detail that she was currently living in a moldy, roach-infested motel on the outskirts of Belrand, pawning off her old designer bags just to afford cheap instant noodles. I made a mental note to have my people buy those bags from the pawn shop and burn them. And Maxwell? Tiara asked. Refused bail. Not that anyone would pay it anyway. I said, leaning back in my leather chair. He's trying to pin the entirety of the financial crimes on Stephanie. His lawyers are arguing that he was just a consultant, and that Stephanie, as the sole shareholder of the shell companies, was the mastermind. Tiara laughed, a cold, sharp sound. He really is a piece of trash. Will it work? No, I shook my head. The digital footprints lead right back to his IP addresses. But the prosecution is thrilled. They're charging them both to the fullest extent of the law. Since Stephanie is a legal adult and her signature is on hundreds of fraudulent documents, she's looking at a minimum of 15 years. She asked to see you, Tiara noted, tapping a folder on her desk. The detention center called my assistant this morning. Do you want to go? I looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows, taking in the sweeping view of the city skyline that now belonged to me. Yes, I said softly. I think I owe my dear sister a visit. After all, it's the last bit of sisterly kindness between us. The Styria County Detention Center smelled of bleach, stale sweat, and despair. It was a far cry from the lavender-scented air of the Cromwell estate. I wore a tailored charcoal gray suit, my hair pulled back into a sleek, professional bun. The heels of my Louboutins clicked against the linoleum as the guard led me into the visitor's room. A moment later, the door on the opposite side opened, and Stephanie was escorted in. I almost didn't recognize her. Gone was the glowing, pampered princess who bragged about her jewelry. Her hair, previously extensions and expensive balayage, was tangled and greasy. She wore an oversized orange jumpsuit that swallowed her small frame. Without her expensive skincare routines and makeup, her face looked sallow and broken out in stress hives. She slumped into the metal chair on the other side of the plexiglass, picking up the phone with trembling hands. I sat down, crossing my legs gracefully, and picked up my receiver. Madison, she choked out. Her voice was raspy, broken from days of crying. You came. I knew you would. We're sisters, Madison. You have to tell them. Tell the police I didn't know what I was signing. I looked at her, my expression completely flat. The intense déjà vu of the moment washed over me. In our last life, she had come to my door looking exactly like this. Desperate, pathetic, begging for help because her life had fallen apart. And when I had shown her a sliver of pity, she had murdered me. Why would I do that, Stephanie? I asked calmly. Because I'm innocent, she screamed, slamming her hand against the glass. The guard behind her twitched, placing a hand on his baton, but I raised a finger to signal I was fine. Dad tricked me. He said the papers were for my trust fund. He said women shouldn't worry their pretty heads about numbers. I didn't know it was stolen money. Ignorance of the law is not an excuse, I quoted dryly. You wanted the money. You loved the cars, the dresses, the status. You were perfectly happy to reap the rewards of the theft when you thought Tiara and I were ruined. You gloated about it at your birthday party, remember? You claimed it was your time to be the heiress. Stephanie choked on a sob, her chest heaving. It's not fair. We both went back in time. We both prayed to the Virgin Mary for a second chance. Why did you get everything? Why did you get the smart mother, the money, the power? I actually laughed. A genuine, amused laugh. Stephanie, you absolute idiot. Look at me. She looked up, her eyes red and puffy. I didn't get the smart mother, I said, my voice dropping to a low, lethal whisper. I chose her. When we stood in the void, waiting to be reborn, you rushed to choose Lynette because you thought catering to a man was the ultimate victory. You thought securing the love of a scumbag father was the key to a good life. I leaned closer to the glass. You thought Tiara was a failure because she didn't coddle Maxwell. You thought she was weak. But Tiara Cromwell is a titan. And while you spent 18 years starving yourself in the womb, faking illnesses to get Dad's attention, and begging him to teach you basic math, I was studying. Stephanie stared at me, her lips trembling. I read balance sheets when I was 10. I continued. I sat in board meetings at 14. I learned corporate law, asset management, and crisis PR. When Tiara realized Maxwell was stealing from us, we didn't cry. We built a trap. We worked together. I earned my place. You just waited for it to be handed to you. I chose wrong, Stephanie whispered, her eyes widening in pure horror as the realization finally crushed her delusion. I chose wrong again. Yes. You did, I agreed. You tied your entire existence to the whims of a man who didn't even love your mother, let alone you. You thought being a pretty, helpless girl would save you. Instead, he used you as a human shield. Help me, she begged, tears streaming down her face, leaving tracks in the grime. Please, Madison. I don't want to go to prison. They say I'll get 20 years. I'll be almost 40 when I get out. I'll have nothing. Please. I'll do anything. I'll be your servant. In our last life, I said softly. You came to me crying just like this. I offered you money. I offered you a way out. And what did you do? Stephanie froze. The memory of her pushing me into the deep end of the pool, the feeling of the water filling my lungs, flashed in her eyes. I haven't forgotten the feeling of drowning, Stephanie, I said, my voice as cold as the bottom of that pool. So no, I won't help you. Enjoy prison. I hear the jumpsuits really bring out your eyes. I hung up the phone. As I stood and walked away, she began screaming, slamming both fists against the reinforced glass. Madison. Madison, come back. Give me another chance. I want another chance. I didn't look back. The trial was a media circus. Maxwell Harvey, once a respected figure in high society, was reduced to a sniveling, aggressive mess on the stand. He threw everyone under the bus, his lawyers, his subordinates, his mistress, and his daughter. The jury hated him instantly. Stephanie's defense strategy was just as pathetic. Her lawyers tried to play the dumb blonde card, arguing she was too unintelligent to understand the documents she signed. But the prosecution produced text messages where Stephanie explicitly bragged to her friends about hiding daddy's money and taking over the Cromwell bitch's empire. The verdicts were swift and merciless. Maxwell was sentenced to 35 years in federal prison, without the possibility of parole. Given his age and his weak heart, it was effectively a death sentence. Stephanie was convicted on 14 counts of fraud and accessory. The judge, disgusted by her lack of remorse and her attempts to shift blame, handed down a harsh sentence. 22 years in a maximum security women's correctional facility. When the gavel fell, Stephanie didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stared blankly ahead, as if her mind had simply snapped. Life moved on quickly. Society has a short memory for the fallen. At 21, I fully took over the Cromwell empire. Tiara officially retired, choosing to spend her days traveling the world on her private yacht, painting, and enjoying the life she had worked so hard to build. I expanded our tech division, acquired 3 rival companies, and tripled our market cap. The name Harvey was completely erased from the corporate world. I legally changed my last name to Cromwell. Madison Cromwell. It had a nice ring to it. I rarely thought of my past life anymore. The frail, sick girl who wore dead people's clothes was gone. The girl who drowned in a pool out of misplaced sisterly guilt was dead. I was a queen ruling over a kingdom made of gold and steel. But sometimes, my security team would bring me updates. Lynette didn't last long on the streets. Stripped of her beauty, her womb, and her wealth, she turned to cheap liquor to numb the reality of her miserable existence. One winter night, heavily intoxicated, she stumbled into an alleyway behind a dive bar and fell asleep. With her immune system wrecked from years of dangerous diet pills and the botched hysterectomy, she developed severe pneumonia. She died alone, coughing up blood in a puddle of freezing slush. A fitting end for the woman who used to plunge me into ice water just to get Maxwell's attention. And then there was Stephanie. The Stereo Women's Correctional Facility was a brutal place. There were no princesses there. There was only survival. According to the warden, who I occasionally donated generous sums to for facility improvements, Stephanie had a hard time adjusting. She tried to use her old tactics, batting her eyelashes, playing the victim, trying to manipulate the guards and the stronger inmates. It backfired spectacularly. Within her first month, she crossed the wrong gang leader and ended up with a broken jaw and 3 cracked ribs. After she got out of the infirmary, she changed. She became silent, withdrawn, and intensely paranoid. But the most disturbing report came during her 3rd year of incarceration. My head of security, a stoic former military man named Vance, placed a manila folder on my mahogany desk. Miss Cromwell, we received a report from the prison psychologist regarding inmate 4098, Stephanie Harvey. I paused, setting down my gold fountain pen. Go on. She has been placed on permanent suicide watch, Vance said, his face expressionless. She's made 5 attempts on her own life in the past month. I frowned, opening the folder. Inside were medical reports and transcripts of her psychiatric evaluations. Is she depressed? I asked, scanning the documents. Trying to escape the reality of her sentence? No, ma'am, Vance replied, a hint of unease in his voice. According to the psychiatrist, she doesn't want to die to escape. She wants to die so she can restart. She keeps rambling about a Virgin Mary statue. She claims that if she can just die, her soul will go back to the void, and she can choose the right womb this time. I stopped reading. My blood ran cold for a fraction of a second, before a dark, grim realization settled over me. She remembered the reset. She remembered how we got here. And in her broken, twisted mind, she thought the universe was like a video game. She thought that if she killed herself, she would just respawn at the character selection screen. I read the transcript of her latest therapy session. Dr. Eris. Stephanie, why did you try to cut your wrists with the sharpened toothbrush? Do you want to end your pain? Stephanie, no. You don't understand. I just need to go back. If I die, I can go back to the statue. I prayed 100,000 times. I earned it. I just chose the wrong mother again. Next time I'll choose Tiara. I'll be Madison. I just have to die so I can restart. Let me die. Let me try again. I closed the folder slowly. She thinks death is a doorway. I murmured to myself. She's completely psychotic, ma'am, Vance said, shifting uncomfortably. The guards have stripped her cell of everything. She's in a padded room, in a straitjacket. But she keeps trying. Last week, she tried to swallow her own tongue to choke herself. The guards had to pry her jaw open and sedate her. A chilling image filled my mind. Stephanie, trapped in a sterile white room, thrashing against her restraints, weeping in absolute despair. Not because she was in prison, but because she couldn't reach the reset button she so desperately believed in. She was taking her own life over and over, stopped only by the medical staff who kept dragging her back to the harsh, unforgiving reality of the present. A continuous, agonizing loop of attempted death and forced resurrection. Shall I have the warden arrange better psychiatric care for her? Vance asked, misinterpreting my silence. No, I said, my voice smooth and indifferent. Let the prison handle it according to their standard protocols. We aren't a charity, Vance. Understood, ma'am. Vance took the folder and left the office. I stood up from my desk and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window. The sun was setting over the city, painting the skyscrapers in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. Below me, millions of people were going about their lives, unaware of the gods and monsters that played games with fate. Stephanie thought she could cheat the system. She thought that simply picking the right starting line was all it took to win the race. But life isn't just about the womb you're born into. It's about the teeth you bear, the mind you sharpen, and the blood you're willing to spill to protect what's yours. She wanted a third chance? Let her bleed for it in that padded cell. Let her choke on her own desperation. I raised my hand, gently resting my palm against the cool glass, looking down at the empire I had built. I didn't need to pray to statues anymore. I didn't need divine intervention. I had already won.